Genesis 38. About that time, Judah went down from his brothers, and he was camped near an Adulamite man whose name was Hira. There Judah saw the daughter of the Canaanite man whose name was Shua. Then he took her as a wife, and she slept with her. And then she became pregnant and gave birth to a son and named him She became pregnant again and gave birth to a son, and she named him Onan. She gave birth to yet another son, and she called him Shelah. She was in Chezib when she gave birth to him. Then Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was evil in Adonai's eyes. So Adonai put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, "Go to your brother's wife to perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her, and raise up a seed for your brother." But Onan knew that the seed would not be his. So every time he went to his brother's wife, he would destroy it on the ground, so as not to provide a seed for his brother. What he did was evil in Adonai's eyes, so he put him to death also. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Stay as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up," because he thought otherwise he too might die like his brothers. So Tamar went and stayed in her father's house. Now the days became many, and Shua's daughter, Judah's wife, died. After Judah consoled him, he went up to Timnah to his sheep herders, and he and his friend Hira, the old Adulamite. And then Tamar was told, "Look, your father-in-law is going up with Timnah to shear his flocks." Then she removed her widow's clothes from herself, covered herself with a veil, wrapped herself, and sat by the entrance to the springs on the way to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah had grown up, and that she had not been given to him as a wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute because she had covered her face. So he turned aside to her along the way and said, "Please let me sleep with you." For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. "What," she asked, "will you give to me to sleep with?" "Me." "I will send you a young goat from the flock," he said. "Provided you give me a pledge until you send it," she said. "What kind of pledge shall I give you?" he asked. "Your steel and your cord and your staff in your hand," she said. So he gave them to her, and he slept with her, and she got pregnant by him. After she got up and left, she removed her veil from herself and put on the widow's clothes. When Judah sent the young goat by the hand of his friend the Adulamite to take back the pledge from the woman's hand, he could not find her. He asked the men out of her area, saying, "Where is this cult prostitute? She was at the springs along the way." But they said, "There hasn't been a cult prostitute here." So he turned to Judah and said, "I couldn't find her." And the people of that place also said, "There hasn't been a cult prostitute here." Then Judah said, "Let her take then for herself, or will be held in contempt. Behold, I did send this young goat, but you couldn't find her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar has been a prostitute. Look, she's even pregnant by prostitution. Bring her out," Judah said, "and let her be burned." As she was being brought out, she sent a word to her father-in-law, saying, "I am pregnant by the man to whom these things belong." Then she said, "Do you recognize whose these are? The seal, the cords, and the staff?" Then Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I didn't give her to my son Shelah." He was not intimate with her again. Now, when it was time for her to give birth, behold, there were twins in her womb. While she was giving birth, one stuck out his hand, and the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it to his hand, saying, "This one came out first." But as he was pulling his hand back in, behold, his brother came out. So she said, "How have you broken through? The breach is because of you." And he named him Perez. Afterward, his brother, on whose hand was a scarlet thread, came out, and they named him Zerah. Genesis 39. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt. Potiphar, an official of Pharaoh, commander of the bodyguards, bought him from the hand of the Ishmaelites, who had brought him down there. But Adonai was with Joseph, so he became a successful man in the house of his master, the Egyptian. His master saw that Adonai was with him, and that Adonai made everything he set his hand to successful. Joseph found favor in his eyes, so he served him as a personal servant and made him an overseer of his house. Everything that was his he entrusted into his hand. From that time he had made him an overseer to his house and over everything that belonged to him. Adonai blessed the Egyptian house because of Joseph. Adonai's blessing was on everything that belonged to him and in the house and in the field. So he released everything he owned into Joseph's hand. With him in charge, he did not think about anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and handsome in appearance. Now after these things, the master's wife lifted up their eyes at Joseph and said, you guys. "Come lie down with me." But he refused. "Look," he said to his master's wife, "my master doesn't think about anything in the house with me in charge, and everything that belongs to him he's entrusted into my hand. No one in this house is greater than I, and he has nothing withheld. He has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. So how could I commit this great evil and sin against God?" So whenever she spoke to Joseph day after day, he did not listen to her invitation to lie down beside her, to be with her. Now on one such day he came into the house to do his work, and none of the people of the house were there in the house. Then she grabbed him by his garment, saying, "Come lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand, fled, and went outside. When she saw that he had left the garment in her hand and fled outside, she screamed to the men of her house and said to them, "Look, someone brought a Hebrew man to us to fool with us. He approached me to lie with me, so I screamed out loud. When he heard me raise my voice and scream, he left his garment with me, fled, and went outside." Then she kept the garment with her until his master came home. Then she spoke the same words to him, saying, "The Hebrew slave that you brought us approached me to fool with me. Then I raised my voice and screamed, and he left his garment with me and fled outside." Now when master heard such words, his wife spoke to him, saying, "Such are the things that your slave did to me." His anger burned. Then Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. So there he was in the prison. But Adonai was with Joseph and extended kindness to him, and he gave him favor in the eyes of the commander of the prison. The commander of the prison entrusted into Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in prison, so that everything that was there, he was responsible for it. The commander of the prison did not concern himself with anything at all under his care, because Adonai was with him, and Adonai made whatever he did successful. Genesis 40. Now it was after these things that the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt defended their master. The king of Egypt, Pharaoh, was angry with two officials, with the chief of the cupbearers and with the chief of the bakers, so he put them in custody of the house of the commander of the bodyguards. In the prison, the place where Joseph was confined, the commander of the bodyguards assigned Joseph to be with them and serve them as their personal servant. They were in custody for some time. Then the two of them each dreamed a dream on the same night. The dream of each man, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, each had his own interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he observed them, and there they were, looking miserable. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were with him in the custody of the house of his master, saying, "Why are your faces so sad today?" They said to him, "We dreamed a dream, and there is no one to interpret it." Then Joseph said to him, "Don't interpretations belong to God? Please tell me." So the chief of the cupbearers told his dream to Joseph, saying to him, "In my dream, suddenly there was a vine in front of me. On the vine were 3 branches, and it was budding. Its blossoms came out, its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup into Pharaoh's palm." "This is its interpretation," Joseph said to him. "The 3 branches, they are 3 days. In another 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to a position. Then you'll put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you did before, when you were his cupbearer. But if you remember me, that I was with you, when it goes well with you, please show me kindness and mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house. For I was forcibly kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing at all, that they should put me in this pit." When the chief of the bakers saw that the interpretation was good, he said to Joseph, "I also was in my dream, expectantly. There were 3 baskets of white bread on my head, and in the top of the basket was food for Pharaoh, all kinds of baked goods, but the birds were eating them from the basket on my head." Then Joseph answered and said, "This is an interpretation. The 3 baskets, they are its 3 days. In another 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head off of you and will hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off of you." Then it happened on the 3rd day of Pharaoh's birthday that he held the banquet for all his servants. He lifted up the head of the chief cupbearers and the head of the chief of the bakers among his servants. He restored the chief of the cupbearers as his cupbearer, and he put the cup in the palm of Pharaoh's hand. The chief of the bakers he hung. It was just as Pharaoh had interpreted to them, yet the chief of the cupbearers did not remember Joseph. Indeed, he forgot him.